When prisons lose control. A Life Behind Bars documentary. Prisons are built to maintain order. Layers of security, routines, and rules exist to prevent chaos before it begins. But throughout the history of incarceration, there have been moments when those systems failed. Moments when control slipped, not gradually but suddenly. This documentary examines what happens when prisons lose control, and why even the most secure institutions are vulnerable to breakdown. If you value factual, long-form documentaries about prisons and the justice system, consider subscribing to Life Behind Bars. Your support allows us to continue producing in-depth stories like this one. What losing control actually means. When prisons lose control, it does not always look like chaos. It may begin quietly. A breakdown in communication. A delayed response. An assumption that risk is contained when it is not. Loss of control refers to moments when institutional systems fail to regulate behavior, safety, or movement within the facility. Sometimes the result is visible immediately. Other times, the consequences unfold over hours or days. Control is a system, not a guarantee. Prisons rely on systems, not certainty. Control is achieved through staffing, intelligence, infrastructure, predictable routines. When any one of these elements weakens, pressure builds. Most of the time, systems absorb that pressure. Occasionally, they do not. Early warning signs. Loss of control is rarely spontaneous. Correctional reports often show warning signs in advance. Rising tensions between groups. Increased use of lockdowns. Staff shortages. Communication failures. These indicators do not always trigger immediate action. In complex institutions, risk can become normalized. The role of overcrowding. Overcrowding places strain on every layer of prison management. More inmates mean fewer resources per person. Increased tension. Reduced supervision time. When capacity exceeds design, even well-run facilities become vulnerable. Control becomes reactive rather than preventive. Staffing and fatigue. Staff are the backbone of prison control. When staffing levels drop, response times increase. Fatigue affects judgment. Morale declines. Consistency suffers. In these conditions, small incidents are more likely to escalate. Communication breakdowns. Effective control depends on communication. Between officers. Between units. Between administration and staff. When communication fails, due to equipment, hierarchy, or confusion, coordination breaks down. During critical moments, delays of minutes can change outcomes. When routine collapses. Routine is one of the strongest tools prisons have. It reduces unpredictability. When routine collapses, through lockdowns, disruptions, or emergency measures, uncertainty spreads quickly. Inmates respond to uncertainty in different ways. So do staff. Control versus perception. Control is not only about what exists, it is also about what is perceived. When inmates believe control is weakening, behavior can change rapidly. Confidence in authority matters. Once it erodes, restoring it becomes significantly harder. How disturbances begin. Major prison disturbances rarely begin with a single dramatic act. They often start with small disruptions, a delayed movement, a denied request, a misinterpreted decision. In isolation, these incidents appear manageable. In combination, they create friction. When pressure accumulates without release, even minor events can become triggers. The role of group dynamics. Prisons are structured environments, but they contain informal social systems. Groups form around shared identity, proximity, or circumstance. During periods of instability, these dynamics intensify. Rumors spread quickly. Interpretations replace facts. Perceived injustice becomes a rallying point. Control weakens not because authority disappears, but because consensus shifts. Why some incidents spread. Not every disturbance escalates. Those that do often share common conditions. Delayed response. Conflicting instructions. Unclear authority. Inconsistent enforcement. When uncertainty spreads across units, behavior synchronizes. Containment depends on isolation of incidents. When isolation fails, momentum builds. Intelligence failures. Correctional facilities rely heavily on intelligence gathering. This includes monitoring communication, observing behavior patterns, identifying emerging tensions. When intelligence is incomplete, outdated, or dismissed, administrators may underestimate risk. By the time visible signs appear, options are already limited. Response delays and escalation. Speed matters in moments of instability. Delays in response, even brief ones, Allow situations to evolve beyond initial containment plans. Staff must balance restraint with action. Act too early and tension may rise. Act too late and control may already be lost. These decisions are made under pressure, often with incomplete information. Lockdowns as a control tool. Lockdowns are one of the most immediate responses to loss of control. They limit movement, communication, and opportunity. In many cases, lockdowns succeed in restoring order. In others, they deepen frustration and reinforce perceptions of collective punishment. The effectiveness of a lockdown depends on timing, clarity, and trust. When containment backfires. Containment is designed to isolate risk. But under certain conditions, it can amplify it. When individuals feel trapped without resolution, desperation increases. If communication channels are cut entirely, misinformation fills the gap. Containment without engagement can accelerate instability. The role of external pressure. Loss of control inside prisons does not occur in isolation. External factors matter: court decisions, policy changes, transfers, staffing mandates. Sudden changes can destabilize routines. When internal systems are already strained, outside pressure can push them past capacity. Why control is hard to regain. Once control slips, restoring it becomes increasingly difficult. Authority must be reasserted without escalating violence. Trust must be rebuilt while security remains tight. Every action is scrutinized by inmates, staff, and oversight bodies. The aftermath of a disturbance often reshapes policy for years. When breakdowns become riots. When prisons lose control completely, disturbances can escalate into riots. These events are rare, but when they occur, they expose vulnerabilities that routine operations conceal. Riots are not spontaneous explosions of chaos. They are the final stage of accumulated failures. Common conditions before major riots. Investigations into major prison riots consistently identify similar conditions beforehand: prolonged overcrowding, chronic staff shortages, breakdown in communication, unresolved grievances, weak intelligence sharing. No single factor causes a riot. It is the convergence of multiple pressures without release. The role of perception during riots. During a riot, perception matters as much as reality. Inmates may believe control has fully collapsed, even if response teams are mobilizing. Once that belief takes hold, restraint decreases. Actions become driven by momentum rather than intent. Restoring authority becomes exponentially harder with every passing minute. Emergency response protocols. Correctional systems maintain detailed response plans for worst-case scenarios. These plans prioritize staff safety, securing perimeters, isolating affected units, preventing spread. Response teams are trained to regain control methodically rather than aggressively. Speed matters, but coordination matters more. Why force is a last resort? Despite public perception, force is not the preferred solution during prison riots. Excessive force increases injury risk and long-term legal consequences. Administrators aim to contain movement, re-establish communication, separate leaders from followers. Force is used selectively when negotiation and containment fail. After control is restored, the end of a riot does not restore normalcy. Facilities often remain under lockdown for extended periods. Investigations begin immediately. Inmates are reassessed. Housing classifications change. Policies are reviewed. The institution does not return to its previous state. Long-term institutional consequences. Major disturbances reshape correctional practice. They justify increased security measures, expanded isolation units, revised movement protocols. In some cases, they accelerate the construction of new facilities designed around containment rather than rehabilitation. Control becomes more centralized. The impact on staff. Correctional officers carry the aftermath long after headlines fade. Fatigue, stress, and turnover often increase following major incidents. Training expands. Rules tighten. Tolerance for risk decreases. Institutional memory shifts toward caution. What riots reveal about system limits. Riots reveal a central truth about incarceration. Control is not absolute. It depends on cooperation, perception, and balance. When those elements fail simultaneously, even the most secure institutions can fracture. When control is restored, but never the same. When order is finally restored, the institution resumes operation. But it does not return to its previous state. Procedures tighten. Movement becomes more restricted. Tolerance for deviation narrows. The goal is not just to regain control, it is to prevent the conditions that allowed its loss. The shift from management to prevention. After a major breakdown, prison management shifts its posture. Rather than responding to behavior, systems focus on preventing it altogether. Risk thresholds lower. Isolation expands. Discretion contracts. What was once an exceptional response becomes embedded into routine operations. How incidents shape future policy. Every major disturbance leaves a permanent imprint. Investigations lead to recommendations. Recommendations become policy. Policy reshapes daily life inside the facility. Often these changes are justified by a single event, but applied broadly and indefinitely. The memory of lost control outlives the incident itself. The cycle that emerges. A cycle takes shape. Control is tightened to prevent disorder. Tightened control increases pressure. Pressure builds beneath the surface. Most of the time the system holds. Occasionally it breaks again. Each cycle pushes incarceration further toward containment and away from engagement. The cost of never failing again. Institutions designed to never lose control must accept trade-offs. Human interaction is reduced. Flexibility disappears. Error tolerance vanishes. Safety increases, but so does distance. Between staff and inmates. Between policy and people. Between order and purpose. What losing control really exposes. Moments when prisons lose control are often framed as failures. But they also function as revelations. They expose where systems rely on assumption rather than resilience. Where stability depends on perception rather than structure. Where control masks underlying strain. The question is not why breakdowns occur. The question is what systems become in their effort to prevent them. The unresolved tension. Prisons exist to enforce boundaries. But they also exist within a society that expects accountability, safety, and eventual return. The more systems prioritize absolute control, the harder those expectations become to reconcile. Loss of control is feared. But so is what replaces it. When control fails, prisons tighten. When tightening fails, they isolate. In the next episode, we examine what happens when isolation becomes permanent punishment, and how some inmates are sentenced not just to prison but to never leaving it. Moments when prisons lose control are often treated as anomalies. But they reveal something deeper. The limits of systems built on containment, routine, and authority. Each breakdown reshapes policy. Each response tightens control. And each cycle moves incarceration further away from correction and closer to permanence. In the next episode, we examine what happens when that permanence is made official. When the system decides that release is no longer part of the sentence. Thank you for watching Life Behind Bars.